The vote passed unanimously. 372 alien species in the Galactic Council chamber raised their appendages, tentacles, and crystalline formations in agreement. Earth would become a slave world. Its resources would be stripped. Its people would serve. Ambassador Kyle Morrison stood alone at the human podium, his hands gripping the metal edge hard enough to turn his knuckles white. The translation device in his ear buzzed with the cheers and celebratory clicks of species who had just condemned 7 billion humans to bondage. The Vraxian prime speaker, a towering insectoid with mandibles that dripped acidic saliva, gestured toward Kyle with one of its blade-like limbs. The human protests, but his words changed nothing. Earth has no fleet, no weapons capable of defending against even a single council member. They are primitives who stumbled into our galaxy through luck and salvage technology. Kyle's jaw clenched. The Vraxian wasn't wrong. Humanity had only recently cracked faster-than-light travel by reverse engineering a crashed alien probe. Their entire space presence consisted of 12 research vessels and 2 outdated military cruisers. Against the combined might of the Galactic Council, they were nothing. "You've made a mistake," Kyle said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "A catastrophic one." The chamber erupted in laughter. Species that had never agreed on anything else found common ground in mocking the humans' defiance. The Zenthari representative, a floating mass of bioluminescent tentacles, pulsed with colors that the translator interpreted as condescending amusement. "What will you do, human? Your world has 48 hours before the enforcement fleets arrive. Surrender peacefully, and your species will be treated as valuable livestock. Resist, and we will demonstrate why 372 civilizations have survived in this galaxy while thousands have perished." Kyle pulled a small data chip from his pocket and held it up. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ in the chamber focused on the tiny object. "This chip contains humanity's official response to your vote," Kyle said. "You want our world? Come and take it." He inserted the chip into the podium's interface. The chamber's main holographic display activated, showing a stocky man with graying hair and cold blue eyes sitting behind a desk marked with the seal of the Secretary General of Earth's United Government. "My name is Richard Hayes," the man began. "To the members of the Galactic Council who have voted to enslave my species, I have one message. We know we can't win. We know our technology is inferior. We know our numbers are insufficient. We don't care." The laughter in the chamber began to fade. "Humanity has been enslaved before," Richard continued. "We've faced extinction events, world wars, plagues that killed billions, and disasters that should have ended us. We're still here. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we refuse to quit. Ever." The hologram flickered as Richard stood leaning forward with both hands on his desk. "You've given us 48 hours. We'll use every second of it. When your fleets arrive at Earth, they won't find a world ready to surrender. They'll find 7 billion humans who have decided that if we're going down, we're taking as many of you with us as we possibly can." Kyle watched the faces around him shift from amusement to unease. "We've already launched every nuclear weapon in our arsenal into high orbit," Richard said. "We've weaponized our satellites. We've turned our space stations into bombs. Every human who can hold a weapon has volunteered to fight. Our scientists are working around the clock to build weapons from your own technology. And they don't care about safety protocols or long-term consequences anymore." The Vraxian prime speaker's mandibles clacked nervously. "Empty threats from a desperate species." "Test that theory," Richard replied, his smile devoid of warmth. "Come to Earth. See what desperate humans are capable of. And when the first of your ships burns in our atmosphere, remember that you chose this. You could have left us alone. You could have traded with us, allied with us, ignored us. Instead, you voted to chain us. Now you'll learn why humanity has a saying. We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees." The transmission ended. Kyle looked around the chamber at 372 species who suddenly seemed far less confident. "The vote has been cast. The die is thrown. 48 hours, counselors. I suggest you reconsider." He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent chamber. Behind him, the emergency session lights began to flash. The Galactic Council was about to learn a lesson that had been written in blood across human history. Never corner prey that has nothing left to lose. The first enforcement fleet would arrive at Earth in exactly 47 hours and 32 minutes. Humanity had that long to prepare for a war they couldn't win but refused to avoid. In orbit above Earth, millions of humans worked with desperate speed, welding, programming, and arming themselves with whatever they could build or steal. In the council chamber, representatives began frantically calling their homeworlds, demanding intelligence on human military capabilities, historical records of human conflicts, anything that might explain the confidence of a species facing annihilation. What they found terrified them. The Zen-3 intelligence officer pulled up human military history and watched in growing horror as her screen filled with wars spanning thousands of years. Humans had fought with sticks and stones, then bronze and iron, then bullets and bombs, then nuclear fire. They had never stopped fighting. Not for conquest, not for survival, not for ideology, not for anything. Fighting was coded into their genetic memory. The Vraxian military strategist analyzed human tactics and felt his twin hearts racing. Humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to make victory so costly that their enemies would think twice before starting another war. They had a concept called mutually assured destruction, where they built weapons specifically to ensure that if they died, so would their enemies. What kind of species builds weapons designed to kill everyone, including themselves? Across the galaxy, the initial confidence began to crumble. Species that had eagerly voted for Earth's enslavement now wondered if they had made a terrible miscalculation. The humans had no chance of winning a military conflict. Every projection, every simulation, every analysis showed the same result. Total human defeat within days. Possibly hours. But every analysis also showed something else. The cost. The Vraxian fleet commander, General Thex, stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the tactical display of the Sol system. His orders were clear: arrive at Earth, demand surrender, and if refused, begin orbital bombardment until the humans submitted. Standard procedure for a primitive world. Except Earth wasn't responding like a primitive world. "Commander!" his tactical officer called out, her voice trembling. "We're receiving encrypted transmissions from Earth." They're not pleas for mercy. They're broadcasts on all frequencies, in all galactic languages. What do they say? The tactical officer swallowed hard. They're listing coordinates of Vraxian colony worlds, shipyards, and civilian centers. They're threatening to transmit these coordinates and all known Vraxian defensive weaknesses to our enemies if we proceed with the invasion. General Thex's mandibles clenched. The humans were threatening to share military intelligence with the Vraxians' greatest rivals, intelligence that could lead to millions of Vaxian deaths. "They're bluffing," Beck said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sir, they're also broadcasting technical specifications for weapons they've apparently built in the last 40 hours. Kinetic bombardment platforms, biological weapons tailored to Vraxian physiology, and something they're calling relativistic kill missiles. The math checks out. These weapons would work." Beck stared at the data scrolling across his screen. The humans had spent 2 days building weapons specifically designed to kill Vraxians, not just any weapons. Weapons that would be horrifically effective. How did they acquire our biological data? Unknown, sir. But the broadcasts suggest they've been preparing for this possibility since first contact. They've been gathering intelligence on every council species. They know our weaknesses, our colony locations, our trade route, everything. General Thex felt a cold dread settle over him. The humans had been planning for war from the moment they met the council. While pretending to be peaceful explorers, they had been studying, analyzing, and preparing to fight. His communication console lit up with incoming messages from other fleet commanders. The Zen-3 fleet reported similar threats. So did the Krell, the Morphians, and dozens of others. Every enforcement fleet heading toward Earth was receiving detailed, species-specific threats from humanity. The humans couldn't win a conventional war, so they had prepared for an unconventional one. They were threatening mutual destruction on a galactic scale. "Sir, incoming transmission from Earth. It's addressed to you personally." Thex's mandibles clacked nervously. "Put it through." A human appeared on the screen. A woman with sharp features and calculating eyes. She wore the uniform of Earth's military with the insignia of a general. "General Thex," she said, her tone conversational. "My name is General Linda Hayes. I'm currently in command of Earth's orbital defense. I wanted to speak with you directly before you make what might be the last decision of your very long life." Thex bristled at the casual threat. "You cannot win, human. Surrender now, and your people will be spared unnecessary suffering." Linda smiled, and Thex felt his instincts scream danger. "You're absolutely right. We can't win. But General, I don't need to win. I just need to make sure that when the history books are written, they'll say that enslaving humanity cost the Vraxian Empire everything." She gestured, and the screen split. One half showed Vraxian colony worlds. The other showed countdown timers. Those timers represent how long you have before automated systems I've deployed release every piece of intelligence we've gathered about your species to your enemies. Military weaknesses, colony locations, undefended trade routes, political scandals, everything. Your empire will be picked apart by rivals who've wanted to destroy you for centuries. You're insane, Vex hissed. Maybe, Linda agreed. But I'm also dead serious. You have a choice, General. You can attack Earth and guarantee your empire's destruction, or you can return to the Council and tell them that the cost of enslaving humanity is too high. The Council will never back down. The vote was unanimous. Then I guess we'll all die together, Linda said with disturbing calm. But before I go, I'll make sure to take the Vraxian Empire with me, along with the Zenthari Coalition, the Krell Dynasty, and everyone else who thought 7 billion desperate humans would go quietly into slavery. The transmission ended. General Thex stood in silence, his mind racing through tactical scenarios. Every scenario ended the same way. Even if he destroyed Earth completely, the automated systems would activate. His empire would fall. His people would suffer. All because the Council had voted to enslave a species that refused to be enslaved. Similar conversations were happening across all 372 enforcement fleets. Human representatives had contacted every single commander with personalized threats tailored to their species' greatest fears. The humans were losing, but they were going to make sure everyone else lost too. In the Galactic Council chamber, emergency sessions had been ongoing for 36 hours straight. The initial confidence had evaporated completely. Representatives screamed at each other, blaming one another for the disaster unfolding. The Vraxian Prime Speaker stood at the center podium, his voice carrying across the chaos. We underestimated them. We saw a primitive species with inferior technology and assumed they would submit like all the others. We were wrong. They're bluffing, the Krell ambassador insisted, though his 3 eyes showed uncertainty. They must be. Are you willing to bet your homeworld on that assumption? A small furry creature from the Pollux Confederation squeaked. Because I'm not. The humans have already proven they've been gathering intelligence on all of us. They knew this boat was coming, and they prepared for it. The Zenthari representative pulsed angry reds and blacks. So we surrender to threats from a species we could crush in hours? We show weakness to every primitive world in the galaxy? We show wisdom, the Prime Speaker corrected. We acknowledge that some costs are too high, even for victory. The humans cannot defeat us militarily, but they can make victory meaningless. Every simulation shows the same result. If we proceed, we win the battle but lose everything else. An elderly representative from the Wise Ones, a species known for their philosophical approach to conflict, floated to the center of the chamber. Her voice, ancient and measured, silenced the arguing masses. In all my centuries of service to this council, I have studied thousands of species. Most submit when faced with overwhelming force. Some fight and are destroyed. But a few, a very rare few, choose a third path. They make victory so costly that it becomes defeat. Humanity is such a species. She projected historical data into the chamber's display. Look at their history. Humans have faced extinction dozens of times. Asteroid impacts, ice ages, plagues, world wars, nuclear standoffs. They survived not through strength, but through stubborn refusal to accept death. When faced with impossible odds, they don't calculate probabilities. They fight anyway. The Wise One's eyes fixed on the Prime Speaker. You asked them to become slaves. You might as well have asked them to stop breathing. They will die before they submit, and they will ensure we pay for their deaths. The chamber fell silent. The Prime Speaker's mandibles moved slowly as he processed the truth. Then what do you suggest? We revoke the vote. We offer trade agreements instead of chains. We turn potential enemies into allies. And we learn from this mistake before it costs us everything we've built. Murmurs spread through the chamber. The idea of reversing a unanimous council vote was unprecedented. It would show weakness. It would encourage other primitive species to resist. But the alternative was worse. The Prime Speaker called for a new vote. All in favor of revoking the enslavement decree and offering Earth a standard diplomatic alliance instead? 370, two appendages, tentacles, and crystalline formations rose into the air. Unanimous again, but this time in the opposite direction. Kyle Morrison received the notification while standing in Earth's orbital command center, watching the countdown timers tick down. General Linda Hayes stood beside him, her hand resting on the activation switch for the automated intelligence release. Ambassador, his communication officer called out. Priority transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting immediate conference. Kyle and Linda exchanged glances. They had 12 hours left before the enforcement fleets arrived. 12 hours before Earth either burned or took the galaxy with it. "Put them through," Kyle said. The Vraxian Prime Speaker appeared on the screen, and for the first time since Kyle had met him, the arrogant insectoid looked humbled. "Ambassador Morrison," the Prime Speaker began, his translator conveying a tone of respect that hadn't been there before. "The Galactic Council has voted to revoke the enslavement decree. Earth will remain a sovereign world. We wish to discuss terms for a standard diplomatic alliance instead." Kyle felt the tension drain from his shoulders, but he kept his expression neutral. "What changed your minds?" "You did," the Prime Speaker admitted. "You showed us that some species cannot be enslaved because they value freedom more than survival. You showed us that victory without consideration of cost is foolishness. You taught the Council a lesson we should have learned long ago. And the enforcement fleets? Already returning to their home systems. You have our word, Ambassador. Earth is free." Kyle looked at Linda, who nodded slowly. Her finger moved away from the activation switch. "Then we accept your offer," Kyle said. "But understand this, Prime Speaker. If the Council ever votes to enslave humanity again, there won't be threats or warnings. There will only be fire and blood until nothing remains of either us or you. Understood, Ambassador. That mistake will not be repeated." The transmission ended. Kyle slumped into a chair, the weight of the last 48 hours finally hitting him. Linda sat beside him, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "We were bluffing," she said quietly. "About half of those weapon systems. We didn't have time to build them all." Kyle laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. "I know, but they didn't. What if they had called our bluff? Then we would have died making sure they regretted it," Kyle said simply. "That's what humans do." On Earth, 7 billion people received the news that war had been averted. Cities erupted in celebration. People who had been preparing to fight and die for their freedom now celebrated their continued existence. But in quiet rooms across the planet, military leaders and scientists continued their work. The weapons that had been designed in 48 hours of desperate creativity weren't dismantled. They were refined, improved, and hidden away for the next time someone threatened humanity's freedom. Because Kyle was right. That's what humans do. They prepare. They adapt. They refuse to be victims. The Galactic Council had learned this lesson, but it would take time for the galaxy at large to understand what had happened. Word spread slowly at first, then gained momentum as species shared the recordings of humanity's defiance. A primitive species with 12 ships and outdated technology had faced down 372 advanced civilizations and won through sheer force of will and willingness to embrace mutual destruction. The story of Earth's near enslavement became a cautionary tale told across the galaxy. Diplomats learned to approach humanity with respect rather than arrogance. Military strategists studied human tactics and found disturbing patterns of escalation and refusal to accept defeat. But perhaps most importantly, the other primitive species in the galaxy learned something valuable. When faced with impossible odds, when confronted with powers that seemed insurmountable, there was a third option beyond submission or futile resistance. Make victory so costly that your enemies choose peace instead. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, implemented new protocols. Before any vote to subjugate or enslave a species, a full psychological and cultural analysis would be required. They had learned the hard way that technology and numbers weren't the only factors that mattered in conflict. General Thex returned to his homeworld and submitted his report on the near war with Earth. His superiors read it in stunned silence. The humans had been ready to die. More than that, they had been eager to make sure their deaths mattered. "They're insane," one of his superiors commented. "No," Thex corrected, "they're human. And that's far more dangerous." The Zenthari Coalition conducted similar analyses. So did the Krell, the Morphians, and dozens of other council species. The consensus was universal. Humanity was too unpredictable, too willing to embrace destruction, and too creative with limited resources to ever be enslaved safely. It was safer to have them as allies than enemies. 6 months after the vote, Earth received its first official galactic trade delegation. Representatives from 24 species arrived with offers of technology exchange, cultural programs, and mutual defense agreements. Kyle Morrison, now promoted to Secretary of Galactic Relations, greeted them with the same calm demeanor he had shown in the council chamber. "Welcome to Earth," he said, shaking hands, tentacles, and various appendages. "We're glad you came in peace." The Vraxian delegate, a young diplomat named Kress, approached Kyle nervously. Ambassador Morrison, I must ask, were you really prepared to destroy yourselves to stop us? Kyle smiled, but his eyes remained serious. Every single human you see around you voted yes when asked if they were willing to die fighting rather than live in chains. WFO. 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 Credits Mandibles 7 billion pages. WFO.com. WFO. WFO.com. $3.5 million at the end of a pocket. Your species is terrifying. Only when threatened, Kyle assured him. When treated with respect, we're actually quite pleasant. You'll see. The delegation spent 2 weeks on Earth, touring cities, meeting humans, and learning about the culture that had nearly destroyed the galactic order. What they found surprised them. Humans were emotional, passionate, and fiercely protective of their freedom and each other. But they were also generous, curious, and eager to learn from other species. The same intensity that made them dangerous enemies made them incredible allies. Art, music, literature, and scientific innovations flowed from Earth as humans engaged with galactic culture. They absorbed knowledge with startling speed and adapted it to create new technologies and ideas that impressed even the oldest civilizations. The wise ones who had convinced the Council to revoke the enslavement vote visited Earth personally. The ancient being met with Richard Hayes, now retired but still influential in human government. You gambled everything on the Council's fear, the wise one observed. What if we had not feared enough? Richard poured tea for both of them, a gesture of hospitality the wise one had learned to appreciate. Then Earth would have burned, and we would have taken as many of you with us as possible. But I believed you were wise enough to understand the cost. That's why your species is called the wise ones, isn't it? Wisdom comes from learning from mistakes, she replied. We almost made a catastrophic one with your species. But you didn't, Richard said gently. You stopped. You thought. You chose peace. That's all we ever wanted. The respect to make our own choices and the freedom to live as we see fit. And now we're part of the galactic community as equals, not slaves. We'll contribute what we can, learn what we must, and defend our allies as fiercely as we defended ourselves. The wise one sipped her tea thoughtfully. I believe the galaxy will be better for having humanity in it, though I suspect it will also be far more chaotic. Richard laughed, probably. We do tend to shake things up wherever we go. Over the following years, Earth became a vital member of the Galactic Council. Human ingenuity and willingness to take risks that other species found unacceptable led to breakthroughs in technology, medicine, and exploration. But Earth also maintained its military preparedness. The weapons designed during those desperate 48 hours were improved and expanded. Human ships began patrolling the outer regions of Council space, protecting trade routes and responding to threats. The galaxy learned that humans made excellent peacekeepers precisely because potential troublemakers knew that humans wouldn't hesitate to escalate conflicts to mutually destructive levels if necessary. Peace through the promise of overwhelming retaliation became humanity's trademark. General Linda Hayes, now an advisor to the Galactic Defense Forces, trained officers from dozens of species in human military tactics. Her most popular course was titled Deterrence Theory, making your enemy choose peace. The key, she explained to a classroom of alien military officers, is making sure your enemy understands that attacking you will cost them more than any possible gain. You don't need to be able to win. You just need to be able to make winning meaningless. A young Krell officer raised a claw. But General Hayes, doesn't that risk actual mutual destruction? What if the enemy calls your bluff? Linda's expression hardened. It's only a bluff if you're not willing to follow through. Humans were ready to die. That's what made the threat credible. If you're not prepared to accept the consequences of your deterrence strategy, then you're not deterring anything. You're just hoping your enemy doesn't notice you're bluffing. The lesson resonated across the galactic military establishment. Human training methods based on assuming conflict and preparing for worst-case scenarios became standard practice for many species. Ambassador Kyle Morrison stood before the Galactic Council 5 years after the vote that nearly destroyed Earth. This time, he wasn't alone at the human podium. Earth now had 3 representatives and voting privileges on all council matters. Members of the council, Kyle began. Earth wishes to propose a new initiative, a mutual defense treaty that ensures no member species can be enslaved or subjugated by council vote or external force. The proposal caused an immediate stir. Several species objected, claiming it would limit the council's authority. Others, particularly younger or smaller civilizations, supported it enthusiastically. The Vraxian Prime Speaker, who had retained his position despite the catastrophic mistake 5 years earlier, stood to address the chamber. Ambassador Morrison, your proposal would fundamentally change how this council operates. It would prevent us from taking action against truly dangerous species. It would prevent you from enslaving species you merely find inconvenient, Kyle corrected. If a species poses a genuine threat, there are military options that don't involve chains and subjugation. Earth's proposal simply ensures that freedom remains the default state for all sentient beings. The debate lasted for hours. Species argued about sovereignty, security, and the balance between collective action and individual liberty. But slowly, support for the human proposal grew. The wise ones spoke in favor of it. So did the Pollux Confederation and dozens of smaller civilizations that had felt vulnerable to council overreach. Even some of the larger powers, having learned the cost of underestimating determined opponents, agreed that enslavement created more problems than it solved. The vote was called. 372 votes were cast. This time, the result wasn't unanimous, but the majority was clear. The Galactic Freedom Accord passed with 78% approval. Species could no longer be enslaved by council decree. The galaxy had learned from humanity that freedom was worth fighting for, even unto death. Kyle Morrison returned to Earth a hero. Parades were held in his honor across every continent, but in private, he met with the current Secretary General, a sharp woman named Patricia Cole, and expressed his concerns. "We've made enemies," Kyle said bluntly. "The species that voted against the Freedom Accord won't forget that humans pushed it through." "Let them remember," Patricia replied. "Let them remember what happens when someone tries to enslave humanity. Let them remember that we're willing to burn the galaxy down if necessary to protect freedom. That memory will keep us safer than any fleet." "And if they test us again?" Patricia's smile was cold. "Then we'll remind them why the first vote was a mistake. And this time there won't be warnings. There will only be consequences." Kyle nodded slowly. He understood the game they were playing. Peace through strength, freedom through willingness to destroy anyone who threatened it. It was a dangerous balance, but it was working. Earth's population reached 9 billion, spread across the homeworld and dozens of colony planets. Human culture spread throughout the galaxy, adapting and evolving as it mixed with alien civilizations. But in every human settlement, from the smallest outpost to the largest cities, children were taught the story of the vote. They learned about the 48 hours when humanity stood alone against the galaxy. They learned about the weapons built in desperate haste and the threats delivered with calm certainty. They learned that freedom is never given. It's taken and defended with whatever means necessary. And they learned that being human meant refusing to kneel, refusing to submit, and refusing to accept chains no matter the cost. The Galactic Council eventually erected a memorial in their main chamber, a simple plaque that read, "In memory of the enslavement vote of 2891, when 372 species learned that some beings would rather die free than live in chains. May this lesson never be forgotten." Below it, in smaller text, was a quote from Richard Hayes' transmission, "We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees." Every council representative walked past that plaque daily. Some viewed it with shame, remembering their vote to enslave Earth. Others saw it with respect, acknowledging humanity's courage. A few regarded it with resentment, angry that their plans had been thwarted. But all of them remembered, and that memory shaped galactic politics for generations to come. Humanity had won without firing a shot. They had defeated 372 species not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through sheer determination and willingness to embrace mutual destruction rather than submit to slavery. It was the most human victory imaginable, and the galaxy would never forget it. Years later, a young human named Jacob Chen prepared to become Earth's newest ambassador to the Galactic Council. His grandfather had been Kyle Morrison's assistant during the crisis, and Jacob had grown up hearing stories about those desperate 48 hours. On his first day, Jacob stood in the council chamber and looked at the memorial plaque. He read the words carved into metal and felt the weight of history on his shoulders. An elderly Vraxian approached him, moving slowly with age. It was General Thex, now retired but still respected in galactic military circles. "Ambassador Chen," Beck said, his voice carrying the rasp of advanced years. "I led the fleet that was supposed to enslave your world. I wanted you to know that every day since I have been grateful that wiser beings than I stopped me from making the greatest mistake of my life." Jacob extended his hand, and Thex gripped it with surprising gentleness for a being with blade-like limbs. "General, my grandfather told me about you. He said you were one of the first to understand what would have happened if you had attacked." "I understood that my empire would have fallen," Vex said, "but more than that, I understood that I would have been responsible for unleashing human fury on the galaxy. I have studied your species' history extensively since then. I have learned about your world wars, your nuclear standoffs, your capacity for devastation when threatened. And I have learned to be very, very grateful that we chose peace. Humanity doesn't want war. We want freedom, for ourselves and for others. As long as the galaxy respects that, we'll be the best allies you could ask for. And if it doesn't?" Jacob's expression hardened, and for a moment, Vex saw the same fierce determination that Kyle Morrison had shown years ago. "Then the galaxy will learn the lesson again, however many times it takes." Vex nodded slowly. "That is what I tell young officers now when they ask about humanity. I tell them that humans are the kindest species in the galaxy when treated with respect, and the most terrifying when threatened. I tell them to choose which version they want to meet very carefully." The conversation ended, and Jacob took his seat at the human podium. Around him, representatives from hundreds of species conducted the business of galactic governance, trade disputes, exploration rights, scientific collaborations, and defense coordination. But underlying all of it was the memory of what had almost happened. The memory of 372 species who had voted to enslave Earth and had learned the cost of that decision before it was too late. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy not through conquest or technological superiority, but through absolute refusal to accept subjugation. They had shown that some species could not be enslaved because they valued freedom more than life itself. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever. The vote to enslave Earth became a historical turning point. Before the vote, might made right in the Galactic Council. After it, the concept of consent and freedom became central to galactic politics. Other species began asserting their rights more boldly, inspired by humanity's example. The Council adapted, becoming less about domination and more about cooperation. The change wasn't easy or quick, but it was inevitable, because humanity had proven that slaves could fight back, and if they were willing to die fighting, then slavery became too costly to pursue. Jacob Chen served as ambassador for 15 years, during which time he helped negotiate treaties that expanded freedom and self-determination across the galaxy. He worked alongside former adversaries who had learned to respect human determination. When he finally retired and returned to Earth, he was asked what lesson he had learned from his time on the Council. "I learned that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our numbers," Jacob said. "It's our refusal to accept the unacceptable. Other species calculate odds and make rational decisions about when to fight and when to surrender. Humans don't calculate. When our freedom is threatened, we fight. Period." That unpredictability, that willingness to escalate beyond reason, is what makes us both terrifying and valuable as allies. "Would you have really activated those weapon systems?" a reporter asked. "Would you have destroyed Earth and taken the galaxy with it?" Jacob's answer was immediate and unflinching. Without hesitation. "Every human I've ever met would make the same choice. We'd rather cease to exist than exist as slaves. That's not bravery or stupidity. It's simply who we are." That interview was broadcast across the galaxy and studied in military academies and diplomatic schools. The concept of human exceptionalism became a field of academic study. What made humans different? Why were they so willing to embrace mutual destruction? How could other species predict or manage human behavior? The answers varied, but the consensus was clear. Humanity's chaotic history, filled with near extinctions and desperate struggles, had created a species with a fundamentally different risk calculus than most others. Where other species saw impossible odds and surrendered, humans saw impossible odds and attacked anyway. It made them difficult allies sometimes, prone to risky ventures and aggressive responses to threats. But it also made them utterly reliable when freedom was at stake. The galaxy adapted to this new reality. Humanity became the species you called when rational deterrence failed. When pirates, raiders, or rogue states needed to be confronted by beings who didn't calculate costs before responding to injustice. Human peacekeepers became famous for their willingness to wade into conflicts that others avoided, not because they were suicidal, but because they genuinely believed that some things were worth dying for. And slowly, grudgingly, other species began to adopt similar philosophies. The galaxy became more free, more chaotic, and arguably more just because one species had refused to kneel. The memorial plaque in the council chamber was eventually joined by others, commemorating other moments when species stood up for their freedom. But the original plaque remained the most visited, the most photographed, and the most studied, because it represented the moment when the galaxy learned a lesson that should have been obvious from the start. You cannot enslave beings who value freedom more than life. You can kill them, but you cannot chain them. And if you try, they'll make sure you pay a price too high to bear. 372 species had voted to enslave Earth, and every single one of them learned to be grateful that wiser beings had revoked that vote before it was too late. Because the alternative wasn't Earth in chains, it was a galaxy in flames, burning because one species had decided that if they couldn't be free, then nobody deserved to survive. That's what it meant to be human. To stand alone against impossible odds and refuse to submit. To make victory so costly that enemies chose peace instead. To value freedom so highly that death became preferable to slavery. The galaxy had learned this lesson, and it would never forget.